The stars disappeared behind a wall of metal and death. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UED Defiant, staring at the massive screens that showed the impossible sight. Where once the constellation of Perseus had glittered in the distance, now only the dark hulls of alien warships stretched across space. Thousands of them, each one larger than Earth's biggest space station. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, his voice shaking. "We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from all of them at once. Put it through," Chen ordered, though her stomach felt like lead. The main screen flickered and a face appeared that would haunt humanity's nightmares for generations. The creature had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated skull. Its skin was the color of old blood covered in scales that caught the light from its ship's bridge. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the hegemony of Zarthul," the alien said. Its mouth didn't move the way a human mouth would, but the translator made its words clear. "I speak for 12 species who rule over 47 worlds. We have come to your system with a simple message." Chen felt her crew go silent around her. Even the hum of the ship's engines seemed quieter. "You will surrender your world unconditionally," Kethvar continued. "You have 72 of your hours to make this choice. If you surrender, your species will be allowed to live as servants. If you refuse, we will turn your planet into ash and memory." The transmission showed more of the alien bridge. Other creatures moved in the background, some with tentacles instead of arms, others that looked like walking insects, and things that Chen's mind couldn't quite understand. All of them wore the same type of uniform. All of them served the same master, Do. "Not think you can fight us," Kethvar said, and Chen swore she could hear amusement in that grinding voice. "We know everything about your species. You are young. You are weak. You have no allies among the stars. Your weapons cannot pierce our shields. Your ships are toys compared to our fleet." The view changed to show the outside of the hegemony fleet. Ship after ship stretched into the darkness, their hulls gleaming with weapons that could crack planets. Chen tried to count them but gave up after reaching 500. "We have destroyed civilizations that were older and stronger than yours," the alien admiral continued. "The Kethmari had energy weapons that could boil oceans. The Zephyrians could travel between stars faster than light itself. The Mordani could read minds across space. All of them knelt before us in the end. All of them serve us now." Chen's hands gripped the railing of her command platform until her knuckles turned white. Around her she could hear some of her crew members crying quietly. Others whispered prayers in languages from around Earth. "Your planet is beautiful," Kethvar said. And now the screen showed Earth from space, blue and green and perfect. "It will make a fine addition to our empire. The survivors of your species will help us mine its resources. Your children will learn to speak our languages. In time, you will forget you were ever free." The image changed one more time, showing a planet that looked like it might once have been similar to Earth. Now it was gray and lifeless, covered in massive factories that reached up toward space like metal mountains. Strange ships moved between them, carrying resources away to feed the Empire. "This was the homeworld of the Altarians," Kethvar explained. "They chose to fight us. This is what remains of their civilization. We keep it as a reminder to other species who think they can resist the hegemony." Chen watched her tactical officer, Commander Rodriguez, checking his screens again and again. The numbers didn't change. Earth had 31 ships that could fight in space. The enemy had more than 1,000, and each one was bigger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. "You have 72 hours, Kethvar repeated. "Send your surrender to these coordinates. Tell your people to remain in their cities. Our forces will arrive to take control of your government centers and military bases. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of the surrounding area." The transmission ended. The bridge of the Defiant fell into complete silence. "Orders, Admiral," Rodriguez asked quietly. Chen stared at the screen that now showed only stars and the distant shapes of the enemy fleet. 72 hours. Less than 3 days to decide the fate of every human being who had ever lived. "Get me a connection to Earth Command," she said finally. "Priority Alpha, And Rodriguez? Yes, Admiral. Start sending coded messages to all our ships. Tell them to prepare for emergency protocols. Which protocols, Admiral? Chen was quiet for a long moment. Emergency protocols covered everything from evacuation procedures to last resort defensive measures. But there were other protocols too. Ones that most of the fleet didn't even know existed. All of them, she said. On Earth, the news spread faster than wildfire. Every television channel, every radio station, every internet feed carried the same message. The aliens had given humanity 72 hours to surrender or die. In New York, millions of people packed the highways trying to leave the city. The traffic didn't move for hours. People abandoned their cars and walked, carrying whatever they could on their backs. In Beijing, the government held emergency meetings while crowds gathered in Tiananmen Square. Some people demanded that Earth surrender immediately to save lives. Others called for fighting to the end. In London, the rain fell on empty streets as families huddled in their homes, waiting for news that never came. But in other places around the world, different kinds of meetings were taking place. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in facilities that didn't appear on any map, people in unmarked uniforms worked at computers that showed strange readings. Numbers and symbols that would have meant nothing to most humans scrolled across their screens. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, something stirred in trenches so deep that sunlight had never reached them. Ancient engines that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up. On the dark side of the moon, in craters that Earth's telescopes had never been allowed to see, massive doors that had been sealed for 50 years began to open. President Martinez stood in the Situation Room under the White House, surrounded by generals and advisors who all looked like they had seen their own deaths. Options? She asked. General Stevens, the head of the Space Defense Command, shook his head. Against a force that size? We have no options, Madam President. Even if we used every nuclear weapon on Earth, we couldn't scratch their fleet. What about evacuation? Where would we go? Secretary of Defense Walsh asked. They control space. They know where every human colony is. Mars, Europa, Titan. They could destroy all of them without slowing down. Martinez looked at the faces around the table. These were people who had spent their lives preparing for war, but this wasn't war. This was execution. There has to be something, she said. Some way to fight back. The room stayed quiet. Outside, they could hear helicopters flying overhead, probably evacuating other government officials to bunkers that wouldn't matter if the aliens decided to destroy everything. Then Martinez's personal phone rang. Not the red phone that connected to other world leaders, not the secure military line, but her regular cell phone that only her family was supposed to have the number for. She looked at the screen. The number was listed as unknown. Ma'am, you shouldn't answer that, her security chief said. Martinez answered it anyway. Hello? The voice that spoke was human, but she had never heard it before. It was calm and quiet, like someone discussing the weather. Madam President, this is Director Harrison of the Terran Preservation Collective. We need to talk. Every person in the room heard the words. Several of them reached for weapons that wouldn't help against a phone call. Who is this? Martinez demanded. Someone who has been waiting 70 years for this conversation, Harrison replied. Don't worry about the alien ultimatum, Madam President. Don't make any announcements about surrender. And whatever you do, don't let anyone leave the planet. I don't understand. You will. In about 68 hours, you're going to need to make a speech to the world. I suggest you start working on it now. Tell them that humanity has always been stronger than it appears. Tell them that Earth has guardians they never knew existed. The line went dead. Martinez stared at her phone, then looked around the room at the confused and frightened faces of America's most powerful people. General Stevens, she said slowly. Yes, Madam President. In all your years of military service, have you ever heard of something called the Terran Preservation Collective? Stevens frowned, thinking hard. No, ma'am. Never. Martinez nodded. Find out what it is, find out who Director Harrison is, and do it quietly. While the President's people began their search, The man who had called her sat in a room that didn't officially exist, looking at screens that showed things no government on Earth was supposed to know about. Director Harrison was old, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent watching and waiting. Around him, hundreds of people worked at control stations that connected to systems scattered across the solar system and beyond. "Status report," Harrison said to his deputy, a woman named Collins who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "All dark sites are coming online," Collins reported. "The asteroid fields are moving into position. Ocean Base 7 confirms weapons are charged and ready. The moon facilities report launch tubes are clear." "What about the deep space assets?" Collins smiled for the first time in weeks. "Ghost Fleet Alpha is 30 hours out from Earth. Beta and Gamma fleets are moving to intercept positions throughout the system. The enemy has no idea we even exist." Harrison nodded. For 70 years, ever since humanity first detected radio signals from other star systems, the collective had prepared for this moment. They had built weapons in secret, trained soldiers that no government knew existed, and hidden ships in places where no one would think to look. The world thought humanity had 31 military vessels. The truth was closer to 3,000. "Sir," another operator called out, "we're receiving reports from our people in world governments, the UA. Aliens seem confident this will be an easy conquest. They're not taking any special precautions." "Good," Harrison said. "Let them keep thinking we're helpless. In 67 hours, they're going to learn why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." On the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Cathvar reviewed the intelligence reports on humanity one more time. The species was young, barely having achieved spaceflight a century ago. Their weapons were primitive chemical rockets and simple energy beams. Their largest ships could carry maybe a few hundred crew members. It would be the easiest conquest in Hegemony history. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "we are detecting some unusual energy readings from various points in the system. Should we investigate?" Cathvar waved a dismissive hand. "Probably their primitive attempts at hiding military assets. It doesn't matter. Even if they have twice as many ships as we thought, there's still no threat to us." The intelligence officer bowed and returned to his station. If he had looked more carefully at the energy readings, he might have noticed that they were coming from places where no human ships were supposed to be. From asteroids that moved in patterns that weren't quite natural. From regions of space that seemed empty, but reflected sensor beams in strange ways. But the Hegemony had conquered 47 worlds using the same strategy every time. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, and accept the inevitable capitulation of a frightened species. It had worked against civilizations that were centuries older than humanity. It would work again. 66 hours remained until the deadline. Around Earth, families said what they thought might be their final goodbyes. Governments prepared for the end of human independence. The world watched the skies and waited for salvation that seemed impossible. But in the deep places where light never reached in the cold spaces between worlds, things that had been waiting in silence for decades began to move. Engines that could push ships faster than anything the Hegemony had ever seen started to warm up. Weapons that could crack moons began charging their power systems. The aliens were waiting for Earth's surrender. Instead, from the dark, the fleet was beginning to rise. The deadline passed in silence. Admiral Cathvar stared at his communication screens, waiting for the surrender message that should have arrived hours ago. His bridge crew shifted nervously around him, checking their instruments again and again. The primitive humans had been given 72 hours to save their species. That time was now up. Still no response from Earth, Admiral, his communications officer reported, his voice uncertain. Cathvar's 4 eyes narrowed. In 47 previous conquests, this had never happened before. Species always surrendered when faced with the overwhelming power of the Hegemony fleet. Fear was the most reliable weapon in the galaxy. Perhaps their primitive communication systems have failed, suggested his tactical officer, an insect-like creature whose wings buzzed nervously. Or they are too frightened to respond? It doesn't matter, Cathvar decided. Fear can paralyze a species as effectively as surrender. We will proceed with the demonstration bombardment of their moon. That should motivate them to find their voice. The massive hegemony fleet began moving deeper into Earth's solar system. Their ships moved in perfect formation, a wall of metal, and weapons that had broken the will of dozens of worlds. Energy shields glowed around each vessel, and weapon ports opened like hungry mouths. But as they advanced, strange things began happening throughout the solar system. Near Jupiter, the cargo vessel Zethmar was making a routine patrol when its engines suddenly died. Captain Vexhall tried to contact the engineering section but received no response. When security teams broke down the door to the engine room, they found nothing but empty space. 23 crew members had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their uniforms and a strange smell like burning metal. The ship's computer showed no signs of attack. No alarms had sounded. The crew had simply disappeared. 3 days later, another hegemony ship investigating the disappearance also went silent. This time, rescue teams found the vessel drifting empty near Europa, its hull intact but every living being aboard gone. The only sign of struggle was strange burn marks on the walls that didn't match any known weapon. Admiral Kethavar read these reports with growing irritation rather than concern. Clearly, the desperate humans were resorting to suicide attacks, probably using some kind of stealth technology to board hegemony ships. It was annoying, but hardly a threat to his main fleet. Increase patrol schedules around the outer system, he ordered. These human insects think they can sting us before they die. Let them waste their lives on meaningless gestures. On Earth, the silence wasn't surrender or fear. It was focus. In bunkers buried beneath major cities, families huddled together and waited. They had received strange messages on their phones and computers over the past 3 days. Messages that told them to stay calm, to trust in humanity's hidden guardians, and to be ready for something amazing. President Martinez sat in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by reports from intelligence agencies around the world. Every government on Earth was searching for information about the Terran Preservation Collective, and every search came up empty. It's like they don't exist, General Stevens reported. No financial records, no personnel files, no equipment purchases. Nothing. But they knew my private phone number, Martinez pointed out. They knew about the alien ultimatum before we announced it publicly. Someone has been watching us for a very long time. Secretary of Defense Walsh looked up from his tablet. Madam President, we've found something. The computer systems at NORAD detected unusual activity in the past week. Someone has been accessing satellite networks we didn't even know existed. What kind of satellites? That's the strange part. According to our records, these satellites were never launched, but they're up there watching everything. Some of them have been in orbit for decades. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. Show me. The main screen in the Situation Room displayed what looked like a normal view of Earth from space. But as Walsh adjusted the display settings, dozens of dots appeared in orbit around the planet. Each dot represented a satellite that wasn't supposed to exist. There are more, Walsh said grimly. A lot more. Our deep space monitoring stations are detecting objects throughout the solar system that don't match any known launches. Whatever. The collective is they've been building things in secret for a very long time. Before Martinez could respond, her phone rang again. The same unknown number. Hello, Director Harrison, she said without waiting for the caller to identify himself. Madam President, the calm voice replied. I hope you've been working on that speech. You're going to need it soon. What exactly is happening out there? My people are telling me about satellites and installations that shouldn't exist. They're right. We've been preparing for this day since 1952, when we first intercepted radio signals from the hegemony. We knew they were coming. We knew what they would demand. And we knew that when the time came, humanity would need protectors that no enemy could see coming. Martinez looked around the room at the faces of her advisors. All of them were listening to every word. How many of you are there? More than you might think. Fewer than we need. But enough. Harrison paused. Madam President, in about 18 hours, the alien fleet is going to get a surprise. When that happens, I need you to be ready to address the world. Tell them that humanity has never been defenseless. Tell them that Earth has guardians in the dark. What kind of surprise? The kind that will remind the galaxy why humans are the most dangerous species they've ever encountered. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a trench so deep that the pressure would crush any normal submarine, something immense was stirring to life. Ocean Base 7 had been built in secret over the course of 30 years, using technology that officially didn't exist. Its walls were made from materials that could withstand the crushing depths, and its power systems drew energy from the heat of underwater volcanic vents. Commander Sarah Kim stood in the base's control center, watching as systems that had been dormant for decades came online one by one. Around her, technicians who had trained their entire lives for this moment worked at control panels that connected to weapon systems hidden throughout the ocean floor. Weapon status? Kim asked. Kinetic artillery is charged and ready, her weapons officer reported. We have clear firing solutions on 17 hegemony vessels. The orbital defense platforms are online and waiting for targeting data. Kim nodded. Ocean Base 7 was just one of 12 hidden facilities scattered around Earth's oceans. Each one contained weapons that could reach into space with devastating effect. The aliens thought they were safe in their orbit above Earth's atmosphere. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Any word from the other bases? All reporting. Ready, Commander. The asteroid field installations are also online. The enemy has no idea what's waiting for them. Halfway to Mars, what looked like a normal asteroid had been drifting through space for 15 years. The hegemony scouts had scanned it dozens of times and found nothing but rock and ice. They had no way of knowing that the asteroid was hollow, filled with weapon systems and a crew of 50 humans who had been waiting patiently for this day. Captain Torres watched his screens as the hegemony fleet moved past his position. The alien ships were massive and beautiful in their own deadly way. Their energy shields glowed like aurora around their hulls, and their weapon ports bristled, with enough firepower to destroy small moons. But they were also predictable. The hegemony always used the same tactics, the same formations, the same patterns of movement. Human observers had been studying those patterns for decades, learning every detail of how the aliens conducted their conquests. Distance to lead ship? Torres asked quietly. 2 million kilometers in closing, his tactical officer replied. They'll be in optimal range in 30 minutes. Torres smiled grimly. His ship didn't look like much from the outside, but hidden, within the fake asteroid shell was a weapon system that could accelerate projectiles to nearly 10% of the speed of light. At that velocity, even a small piece of metal could punch through energy shields like they were made of paper. All stations prepare for combat, he ordered. Remember, we get one shot to surprise them. After that, they'll know we exist. Make it count. On the dark side of the moon, massive doors that had been sealed since the 1970s were finally opening. Luna Base 1 had been humanity's first secret military installation beyond Earth. Built under the cover of the Apollo missions, it had been expanded steadily for 50 years. Now it housed weapons that could reach anywhere in the solar system, and ships that were faster and deadlier than anything in Earth's official fleet. Admiral Zhang stood in the base's command center, watching as his ships prepared to launch. Each vessel had been built using technology that human governments weren't supposed to possess, powered by engines that bent space around them and armed with weapons that could crack planets. All ships report ready for launch, Admiral, his aide reported. Good. How many ships does the hegemony think Earth has? According to our intelligence, they believe we have 31 combat vessels. Zhang smiled. They're about to meet 200 more, and those are just the ships we're willing to let them see. Throughout the solar system, similar scenes were playing out. Weapons platforms hidden in asteroid belts came online. Ships that had been disguised as space debris powered up their engines. Soldiers who had trained in secret for decades prepared for the fight they had always known was coming. The hegemony fleet continued its advance toward Earth, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Their scouts reported no unusual activity from the primitive human ships. Their intelligence officers saw no signs of advanced weapons or hidden defenses. Admiral Kathavar stood on his bridge and watched Earth growing larger on his screens. Soon they would be close enough to begin the demonstration bombardment of the planet's moon. The humans would see their satellite reduced to rubble, and then they would finally find their courage to surrender. "Admiral," his sensors officer called out, "I'm detecting some unusual energy readings from various points in the system." Kethavar barely looked up from his tactical display. "Define unusual." "Hard to say, sir. The readings appear to be coming from asteroids and other natural formations, but they don't quite match expected patterns. Probably interference from the system's star," Kethavar dismissed. "These primitive systems often have unusual magnetic fields." If he had looked more carefully, he might have noticed that the energy readings were moving in coordinated patterns, that asteroids were slowly changing their orbits to intercept his fleet's course, that installations on planets and moons throughout the system were powering up weapons that had been sleeping for decades. But the hegemony had never encountered a species that could effectively hide its true military strength. Every previous conquest had revealed the full extent of a civilization's defenses within hours of first contact. They had no reason to expect that humanity would be different. 15 hours until the fleet reached Earth's moon. Around the solar system, thousands of humans made final preparations for a battle that would determine whether their species lived free or died fighting. In hidden bases and disguised ships, in weapons platforms that looked like space debris and installations buried in ocean trenches, humanity's true guardians prepared to reveal themselves. The aliens were waiting for Earth's surrender. Instead, from the dark places where no enemy expected to find them, death was rising to meet them. The trap sprung at exactly 0300 hours, Earth Standard Time. Admiral Kethavar was reviewing the bombardment plans for Earth's moon when his sensors officer suddenly screamed in alarm. The sound was unlike anything the hegemony commander had ever heard from his disciplined crew. "Admiral," the officer shouted, his voice breaking with terror. "The asteroids, they're moving." Kethavar's 4 eyes snapped to the main tactical display. What he saw there made no sense. Throughout the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, chunks of rock that had been drifting peacefully for millions of years were suddenly changing course. But they weren't moving randomly. They were moving with purpose, accelerating toward his fleet in coordinated attack patterns. "That's impossible," Kethavar snarled. "Asteroids don't just decide to—" His words were cut off as the first asteroid opened fire. Captain Torres had been waiting his entire adult life for this moment. As his hidden ship accelerated out of its rocky disguise, he watched the hegemony fleet through his targeting systems. The alien ships were massive and powerful, but they were also completely unprepared for an attack from what they thought was empty space. "Target the lead dreadnought," Torres ordered. "Full power to the kinetic cannon." His weapons officer nodded grimly. "Kinetic cannon charged, projectile loaded and ready." Fire. The weapon that had been hidden inside the fake asteroid was unlike anything in Earth's official military arsenal. It used magnetic fields to accelerate a tungsten rod to nearly 10% of the speed of light. At that velocity, the projectile carried more energy than a nuclear bomb. The tungsten rod crossed 2 million kilometers in less than a minute. The hegemony dreadnought shields, designed to stop energy weapons and conventional explosives, offered no protection against a physical object moving at relativistic speed. The rod punched through the alien ship's hull like a needle through paper. The massive vessel, over 3 kilometers long and home to 50,000 crew members, simply came apart. First, the middle section exploded outward in a ball of plasma, then the shock wave tore through the rest of the ship's structure. Within seconds, one of the hegemony's most powerful warships was nothing but expanding debris. On the hegemony flagship, alarms began screaming as the tactical display updated. One moment they had been tracking 1,000 enemy ships. The next moment one of their largest vessels had simply vanished from the screen. "Report," Kethavar roared. "The destroyer of worlds just exploded," his tactical officer stammered. No warning, no incoming missiles detected. It just came apart. Before Kethavar could respond, another alarm sounded. Then another. Across the tactical display, red warning symbols began appearing as more hegemony ships came under attack. What the aliens had thought was an asteroid field was actually a network of hidden weapon platforms and disguised warships. Each installation had been carefully positioned over decades to create the perfect killing ground. As the hegemony fleet advanced into the trap, Humanity's secret guardians opened fire from every direction at once. Admiral Zhang watched from Luna. Base 1 as his hidden ships launched from the dark side of the moon. 200 vessels that didn't officially exist streaked toward the hegemony fleet at speeds that should have been impossible. Their engines bent space around them, allowing them to accelerate faster than anything the aliens had ever encountered. "All ships, this is Admiral Zhang," he broadcast on the encrypted command channel. "You know what we're fighting for. You know what happens if we fail. Humanity's children are counting on us. Show these aliens why Earth breeds warriors." The human ships struck the hegemony fleet like a hammer blow. They didn't use the careful defensive tactics that alien species typically employed in space combat. Instead, they attacked with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Commander Sarah Kim watched from Ocean Base 7 as her kinetic artillery systems engaged targets in orbit above Earth. The weapons fired projectiles straight up through the atmosphere, at velocities that turned them into streaks of fire across the sky. Each shot was precisely calculated to punch through alien shields and armor at the exact moment of impact. "Target destroyed," her weapons officer reported as another hegemony ship broke apart in Earth's orbit. "Moving to next target." "Keep firing," Kim ordered. "Don't give them time to adapt." Throughout the solar system, weapons that had been sleeping for decades came to life. Installations hidden in Jupiter's moons opened fire with beams of coherent energy that could slice through the hulls of battleships. Platforms disguised as space debris launched missiles that moved too fast for alien point defense systems to intercept. But it wasn't just the surprise that devastated the hegemony fleet. It was the nature of the weapons themselves. Human military technology had developed along a completely different path than that of other species. Where aliens focused on energy shields and directed energy weapons, humans had perfected the art of kinetic warfare. Their weapons didn't try to overload shields. They simply punched through them with brute force. A hegemony cruiser found itself under attack from what its sensors identified as a small human fighter. The alien captain ordered his gunners to destroy the insignificant pest, but the human ship didn't try to avoid the incoming fire. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the cruiser, while its pilot overloaded the ship's reactor. The fighter struck the alien vessel's bridge at nearly the speed of light. The explosion vaporized both ships instantly, but the human pilot had accomplished his mission. One of the hegemony's command vessels was gone, along with its experienced crew. Admiral Kethvar watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before in 47 conquests: fear. The primitive humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence reports said they had 30 ships." "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, his voice shaking. "I'm detecting massive power signatures from the inner system. Something is coming." The main display shifted to show the space between Earth and Mars. At first it looked empty. Then, one by one, ships began to appear. Not just dozens or hundreds, but thousands. They emerged from hiding places that the hegemony had never suspected existed, from asteroid belts and planetary rings, from the shadows of moons and the hearts of nebulae. Each ship that appeared was larger and more heavily armed than the ones before it. These weren't the desperate fighters that had launched the initial attack. These were warships built for systematic destruction, powered by technology that made the hegemony's weapons look primitive. The largest ship to emerge was a kilometer-long dreadnought that hadn't appeared on any human government's fleet roster. Its hull was black as space itself, and weapons ports opened along its length like a constellation of hungry stars. "This is Admiral Harrison of the Terran Defense Fleet," a human voice announced on all frequencies. "You came to our home expecting prey. You found predators." Kethvar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The humans had more than 3,000 ships, and they were all attacking his fleet simultaneously. Worse, they fought with a coordination that suggested decades of planning and preparation. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender demands from the humans." "Surrender demands?" Kethvar couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They're demanding our surrender?" The human transmission came through clearly. Hegemony forces, you are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that attempts to flee will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to comply. For a moment, the bridge of the Hegemony flagship fell completely silent. In the entire history of their empire, no species had ever demanded their surrender. They were the conquerors, the masters of 47 worlds. They didn't surrender to anyone. But as Keithavar watched his tactical display, he saw his 1,000-ship fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere. Human ships moved through his formations like wolves among sheep, their weapons cutting through Hegemony shields and armor with terrifying efficiency. "Status of the fleet?" he asked quietly. His tactical officer's hands shook as he consulted his instruments. "We've lost 30% of our ships in the past hour, Admiral. Another 20% are heavily damaged. The humans, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered before." That was the terrifying truth. Every other species the Hegemony had conquered fought defensively, trying to protect their worlds and populations. The humans fought offensively, seeking out Hegemony ships to destroy with single-minded determination. When a human ship was damaged, it didn't retreat for repairs. It accelerated toward the nearest enemy vessel and detonated its reactor. When alien boarding parties tried to capture human ships, they found that the crews had sabotaged their own vessels rather than be taken alive. They're not trying to survive this battle, Keithavar realized with growing horror. They're trying to take as many of us with them as possible. His intelligence officer looked up from his console with wide, frightened eyes. "Admiral, we're intercepting human communications. They're talking about their families, about their children. They know they're probably going to die, but they're still fighting." Keithavar had conquered civilizations that were older and more advanced than humanity. He had broken species that had energy weapons and faster-than-light travel and telepathic abilities, but none of them had fought like this. None of them had been willing to die with such determination to protect their home. "Sir," his sensors officer reported, "the human fleet is moving to surround us. They're cutting off our retreat routes." On the main screen, Keithavar watched as human ships moved into position around his battered fleet. Each enemy vessel carried weapons that could destroy Hegemony ships with single shots. Each human crew was prepared to die rather than let a single alien escape to threaten their world. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Keithavar of the Hegemony began to understand what it meant to be prey. The 5-minute deadline was approaching. Around the solar system, human ships waited for the order to finish what they had started. In hidden bases and secret installations, weapons charged for a final devastating barrage that would wipe the Hegemony fleet from existence. The aliens had come expecting Earth's surrender. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by humanity's true fleet, facing warriors who would rather die than kneel. The trap had sprung. The hunt was almost over. Even surrounded by thousands of human ships, even with half his fleet destroyed and the rest crippled, the Hegemony commander could not accept the impossible. His empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were the masters of 47 worlds. They did not bow to primitive species that barely had spaceflight. "All ships," he broadcast on the fleet command frequency, "prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. We retreat to the outer system and call for reinforcements." But as his navigation officer tried to activate the faster-than-light engines, nothing happened. The massive Hegemony ships remained trapped in normal space, surrounded by their enemies. "Sir," the navigation officer reported with growing panic, "the hyperspace engines aren't responding. Something is interfering with our jump systems." Admiral Harrison's voice came across all Hegemony frequencies, calm and cold as deep space. "Did you really think we would let you run away to bring more ships? We've been jamming your hyperspace communications since you entered our system. No messages go out. No ships leave. Today, the Hegemony learns what it means to be hunted." Keithavar's 4 eyes narrowed with rage. If the humans wanted a fight to the death, he would give them one. "All ships, attack formation. Target their largest vessels. Show these insects why the galaxy fears us." What followed was unlike any space battle in galactic history. The hegemony ships designed for the systematic conquest of terrified civilizations found themselves fighting an enemy that broke every rule of warfare. Human vessels didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't seek cover behind larger ships. They didn't try to preserve their own lives. Instead, they attacked with a fury that bordered on madness. Captain Martinez commanded the human destroyer Retribution when it came under fire from a hegemony battleship 3 times its size. The alien vessel's energy weapons tore through his ship's armor, killing half his crew and destroying the engine room. Any sane captain would have retreated or surrendered. Martinez ordered his remaining crew to abandon ship, then locked himself in the pilot's seat and accelerated directly toward the enemy battleship. "This is for every world you've conquered," he said into his radio as the Retribution struck the alien ship's hull. The collision triggered a chain reaction that destroyed both vessels, but Martinez had taken 1,000 enemy crew members with him. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield. Human fighters, their weapons exhausted and their hulls breached, rammed enemy cruisers while their pilots sang songs from Earth. Damaged human destroyers activated their self-destruct systems while locked in close combat with alien dreadnoughts, ensuring mutual destruction. But it wasn't suicide. It was calculation. Every human death was carefully planned to maximize damage to the enemy fleet. Commander Lisa Park watched from the bridge of the carrier New Horizon as her fighter squadrons engaged hegemony forces throughout the battle zone. Her pilots flew ships that looked primitive compared to alien technology, but they moved with precision that no enemy could match. "Phoenix Squadron, you have 3 enemy fighters on your tail," she radioed to her pilots. "Copy that, Control," came the reply from Squadron Leader Chen. Beginning attack run on the enemy battleship, Park watched on her tactical display as the 3 human fighters ignored the enemies behind them and dove toward a massive hegemony vessel. The alien ship's point defense systems opened fire, filling space with deadly energy beams. 2 of the human fighters were destroyed before they could complete their attack. But the third, piloted by Chen himself, reached the battleship's hull and detonated a fusion bomb that had been attached to his fighter's hull. The explosion tore through the alien ship's armor and detonated its main reactor. Another hegemony vessel died, taking with it the crew and weapons that might have threatened Earth. "Phoenix leader is down," Park reported quietly into her command log. "Target destroyed. Mission accomplished." This was how humans fought. Every loss was meaningful. Every death served a purpose. They didn't waste lives, but they didn't hesitate to spend them when the price was worth paying. On the hegemony flagship, Admiral Kethvar watched his tactical display with growing desperation. His fleet was losing ships faster than he could count. Worse, the humans seemed to know exactly where to hit each alien vessel for maximum damage. "How do they know our weak points?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. The alien officer's hands trembled as he consulted his reports. "Sir, it appears they've been studying our ship designs for decades. They know the location of every reactor, every weapon system, every life support facility on every class of hegemony vessel." Kethvar felt a chill run through his armored body. "That's impossible. Our ship designs are classified at the highest levels." "Admiral," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It's Admiral Harrison again." "Put it through." Harrison's image appeared on the main screen. He was an older human with gray hair and tired eyes. But there was something in his expression that made Kethvar think of predators waiting in the dark. "Admiral Kethvar," Harrison said, "I thought you might be curious about how we know so much about your ships. The answer is simple. We've been watching you for 70 years. The screen changed to show images that made Kethvar's blood freeze. Secret hegemony installations on distant worlds. Classified military bases that no enemy should have been able to find. Ships under construction in hidden shipyards. Every world you've conquered we were watching," Harrison continued. "Every species you enslaved, we studied their fate. Every weapon you built, we found a way to counter. Did you really think you could rule 47 worlds without someone noticing?" More images flashed across the screen. Human agents disguised as members of conquered species, working in hegemony facilities and recording everything they saw, spy satellites positioned to monitor alien communications, secret bases hidden in asteroid fields and planetary rings throughout hegemony space. "We know where you live," Harrison said. "We know where you build your ships. We know where you train your soldiers. And most importantly, we know where you keep your families." Kethvar stared at the screen in horror as images showed hegemony civilian colonies, the peaceful worlds where their children and elderly lived safely behind the protection of the fleet. Except they weren't safe anymore. Human ships were visible, in several of the images, dark and silent but unmistakably present. "You're threatening civilians," Kethvar snarled. "We're making a point," Harrison replied coldly. "For 70 years you've used fear as a weapon. You've threatened to destroy entire worlds if they didn't surrender. Now you know how it feels to have your own people in danger." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with the terrifying realization that the humans had been preparing for this war longer than most hegemony officers had been alive. But there was no time to process the implications. The battle for the solar system was still raging and his fleet was losing badly. "Status report," he ordered. His tactical officer looked up with haunted eyes. "We've lost 60% of our ships, Admiral. The humans are systematically destroying our formations. They're targeting our command vessels first, trying to break our coordination." As if to prove his point, another alarm sounded as a hegemony cruiser exploded under fire from human destroyers. The alien ship had been coordinating defense for an entire section of the fleet. With its destruction, dozens of other hegemony vessels found themselves isolated and vulnerable. "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, "new contacts approaching from the outer system, multiple hyperspace signatures." For a moment, Kethvar felt hope, reinforcements from other hegemony fleets coming to turn the tide of battle. Then the ships emerged from hyperspace, and he saw that they weren't hegemony vessels at all. The newcomers were human ships, but not like the ones already in the battle. These were larger, more advanced, with hull designs that incorporated technology no species should have possessed. Their weapons were charged and ready, and they moved with the confidence of predators approaching trapped prey. "This is Admiral Cross of the Human Deep Strike Fleet," a new voice announced. "We've been hunting hegemony forces in the outer systems for the past month. Looks like we arrived just in time for the party." Kethvar's tactical officer updated his display to show the new arrivals. "Sir, I count over 800 enemy vessels. They're moving to complete the encirclement of our fleet. 800 more ships. Added to the thousands already surrounding them, the humans now outnumbered the hegemony fleet by more than 4-1. But it wasn't just the numbers that terrified Kethvar. It was the implications. The humans had multiple fleets operating throughout the galaxy. They had been conducting military operations in hegemony space for months, possibly years, without anyone knowing. The primitive species that was supposed to surrender within 72 hours had been waging a secret war against the galaxy's greatest empire. "Admiral," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender demands again." Kethvar looked around his bridge at the frightened faces of his crew. These were veterans who had served in dozens of conquests, soldiers who had never known defeat. Now they looked at their instruments and saw only death approaching from every direction. But surrender was not an option. The hegemony did not yield to inferior species. Even if it meant the destruction of his entire fleet, he would not be the first admiral in their history to bow before primitives. "All ships," he broadcast, "prepare for final assault. If we are to die here, we die as warriors of the hegemony." Around the solar system, the battered remains of his fleet prepared for one last desperate attack. They had maybe 300 ships left that could still fight. Against them were ranged nearly 5,000 human vessels, all of them crewed by warriors who had been preparing their entire lives for this battle. The odds were hopeless, but Kethvar had one advantage left: the fanatical loyalty of his crews, who would rather die than dishonor their empire. He just didn't realize that. He was facing an enemy whose determination exceeded even his own. Admiral Kethvar's remaining ships charged into the human formations with the desperate fury of cornered predators. For a brief moment, it seemed like hegemony courage might overcome human numbers. Alien energy weapons carved through human ships, turning them into expanding clouds of plasma and debris. But for every human ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. And unlike the hegemony forces, the human fleet seemed to have an unlimited supply of reinforcements. Kethvar watched his tactical display as his last battlecruiser exploded under fire from a dozen human destroyers. The alien captain had fought bravely, taking 5 enemy ships with him before dying. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. "Admiral," his communications officer reported with a voice drained of all emotion, "the Sword of Zarthul has been destroyed. We are the last ship remaining." Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his surviving crew. These were beings who had served the hegemony faithfully for decades. They deserved better than to die in the cold darkness between worlds, surrounded by enemies they had never imagined could exist. But even as their flagship shuddered under impact from human weapons, even as systems failed one by one around them, surrender was not an option. The hegemony had never yielded to any enemy. He would not be the first to break that tradition. "Prepare the ship's core for overload," he ordered quietly. "If we must die, we'll take as many of them with us as possible." His engineering officer nodded grimly and began entering the self-destruct sequence. In 5 minutes, their ship's reactor would explode with enough force to destroy everything within 1,000 kilometers. Maybe they could take a few dozen human ships with them. That was when Admiral Harrison's voice filled their bridge one final time. "Admiral Kethvar, this is your last chance. Surrender now, and your crew will be spared. Continue fighting, and you'll all die for nothing." Kethvar activated his own communication system. His 4 eyes burned with hatred as he stared into the camera that would carry his words to the human fleet. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the hegemony of Zarthul," he said with as much dignity as he could manage. "We have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. We have conquered 47 worlds. We do not surrender to primitive species who should be kneeling at our feet." Harrison's response was immediate and cold. "Then you'll die as primitives. All ships, stand clear. Let them have their glorious death." The human fleet pulled back, leaving the damaged hegemony flagship alone in the darkness. Kethvar felt a moment of bitter satisfaction. At least the humans respected their enemies enough to give them space for an honorable suicide. But as the seconds ticked down toward the reactor overload, something unexpected happened. His engineering officer looked up from his console with confusion written across his features. "Sir," the officer reported, "the self-destruct sequence has been overridden. I can't activate the core overload." "What?" Kethvar snarled. "That's impossible. Run the sequence again." "I've tried, Admiral. Something is blocking the command codes. We can't destroy the ship." Before Kethvar could respond, his tactical officer pointed at the main display with one trembling appendage. "Admiral, look." The screen showed space around their ship, but something was wrong. The stars were moving in patterns that made no sense. Reality itself seemed to be bending around them. Then Kethvar understood. The humans weren't just going to let them die gloriously. They were going to capture them alive, to study them like insects in a jar. The thought filled him with rage and terror in equal measure. "This is a violation of the laws of war," he broadcast on all frequencies. "We demand the right to die as warriors." Harrison's reply came immediately. "You lost the right to make demands when you threatened to exterminate our entire species. But don't worry, Admiral. Death will come for you eventually. Just not today." The hegemony flagship was pulled inexorably toward the human fleet by forces that Kethvar couldn't understand or resist. Around them, human ships moved into positions that spoke of careful planning and absolute control. They had won more than a battle. They had won everything. Hours later, Admiral Harrison stood in the command center of his flagship, watching as the last hegemony survivors were processed by human boarding teams. The alien crews had fought even after their ships were disabled, forcing his people to use stun weapons to subdue them. Even in defeat, they showed the courage that had made them masters of 47 worlds. "Status report," Harrison ordered. His aide, Colonel Martinez, consulted her tablet before responding. Total enemy casualties: 87,000 killed, 12,000 captured. Our losses: 15,000 dead, 38,000 wounded. We lost 433 ships. Harrison nodded grimly. The price had been high, but not as high as it could have been. His people had trained for this battle their entire lives, and that preparation had saved countless human lives. What about the deep space assets? Ghost Fleet Alpha reports all hegemony patrol vessels in the outer system have been eliminated. Beta and Gamma fleets are moving to secure the jump points. No enemy ships escaped. That was the most important part. No hegemony vessel could be allowed to return to their empire with word of what had happened here. For the next phase of humanity's plan to work, the galaxy had to believe that the Earth conquest fleet had simply vanished. "Sir," Martinez continued, "President Martinez is asking when you'll be ready to address the world." Harrison looked out. The main viewport at Earth, blue and green and perfect in the distance. Billions of humans were down there waiting to learn whether their species would live free or die fighting. They deserved to know that their guardians had done their job. Tell the president we're ready now. An hour later, every television screen, radio, and internet connection on Earth carried the same signal. President Martinez sat at her desk in the Oval Office, but she wasn't alone. Standing behind her were men and women in uniforms that most of the world had never seen before. "My fellow humans," Martinez began, "today our species faced the greatest threat in our history. An alien empire that had conquered 47 worlds came to Earth demanding our surrender. They expected us to kneel before their superior power." She paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression of fierce pride. Instead, they met the Terran Defense Fleet. They met weapons and warriors that had been preparing for this day since 1952. They met humans who would rather die than surrender their freedom. The broadcast switched to show footage from the battle. Massive alien ships exploding under human weapons. Enemy fleets being systematically destroyed by forces they never saw coming. The remnants of the hegemony armada being captured by human vessels. "The hegemony came here with over 1,000 ships," Martinez continued. "None of them are returning home. The aliens who threatened to turn our world to ash are now our prisoners. The empire that ruled 47 worlds has learned that there are 48 free peoples in this galaxy." Around the world, crowds gathered in public squares to watch the broadcast. In New York's Times Square, millions of people stood in stunned silence as they saw human ships moving through space with casual mastery. In London, families who had spent days preparing for the end of the world wept with relief. In Beijing, government officials who had been planning surrender watched in amazement as their species revealed its true strength. "I know many of you have questions," Martinez said. "How did we build such a fleet in secret? How long have we known about the alien threat? Why weren't you told about humanity's true defenders?" She looked directly at the camera again, and this time her expression was apologetic. "The answers to those questions will come in time. What matters now is this: Earth is safe, humanity is free, and the galaxy knows that we are not the primitive species they thought we were." The broadcast ended, but the message that went out to the stars was just beginning. In a secure facility beneath the Swiss Alps, technicians worked at computers that connected to communication arrays hidden throughout the solar system. They were composing a message that would be broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Not just the 47 worlds ruled by the hegemony, but the hundreds of other species that lived in fear of alien conquest. The message was simple, transmitted in dozens of languages to ensure that every species could understand it. "This is Earth. We stand with the oppressed. We come for the oppressors. The dark between stars belongs to us now." But the most important part of the message was what came next. Detailed technical specifications for weapons that could defeat hegemony ships. Tactical information about enemy fleet movements and base locations. Most importantly, an offer of alliance to any species willing to fight for their freedom. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had maintained control through fear and superior firepower. Now that monopoly was broken. Now there was another power, in the galaxy, one that didn't conquer worlds but liberated them. Admiral Harrison stood in his command center, watching as automated probes launched from hidden facilities throughout the solar system. Each probe carried the same message of defiance and hope. They would spread throughout the galaxy, seeking out the oppressed and offering them a choice between servitude and freedom. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're receiving responses to the A broadcast. The Altarians are asking for our help in liberating their homeworld. The Kethmari want to know if we can provide weapons to their resistance movement. Even some of the hegemony's own client species are requesting contact." Harrison smiled grimly. This was what they had always hoped for, not just to defeat the hegemony fleet, but to break their empire from within. To give hope to species that had forgotten what freedom meant. "How long until our deep space fleets reach their targets?" "Ghost Fleet Alpha will arrive at the first hegemony base in 6 days. Beta Fleet is already in position to intercept their reinforcement convoys. Gamma Fleet reports they've made contact with several resistance groups who are ready to provide intelligence." Harrison nodded. The battle for Earth had been just the beginning. Now came the real war. The campaign to dismantle an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. In the depths of space, human ships that had been hiding for decades began changing course. Their crews, trained for missions they had thought might never come, prepared for battles on distant worlds. They carried weapons that could crack moons and the determination to use them against any enemy that threatened freedom. The galaxy had expected Earth's surrender. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in the darkness between stars. Something that remembered every conquered world, every enslaved species, every act of tyranny committed by those who claimed to rule through superior force. Humanity had been underestimated. That mistake would cost the hegemony everything. They had built, the hunt had begun.